Hello, welcome to Guide London. My name is Nick Salmond. I'm a London Blue Badge tourist guide and a member of the Association of the Professional Tourist Guides that runs the Guide London website. And we represent around 600 qualified Blue Badge London guides. Now, if you've been able to join us over the last few months, you'll know we're broadcasting every Tuesday at this time, 4 o'clock in the UK time, to bring a little bit of London to you, because we're unable to go and guide for real at the moment. Hopefully the lockdown will be lifted soon and we'll see you all back here in person. But for the moment, we're bringing you a little bit of virtual London. And if you've missed any of our broadcasts, then simply go to YouTube or Facebook, search for Guide London, and you can find all kinds of presentations on there, from the Great Fire of London to Westminster Abbey, from the Tower of London to St Paul's Cathedral, from Charles Dickens to Florence Nightingale. They're all there on YouTube. Just go and search, and if you're on YouTube, then do try and subscribe to our channel as well. That will give you indications when we have a new broadcast. Now, today we're talking about one particular area of London, and if you come to London as a tourist, then it's probably an area that you will end up at one time or other, because it's very much the centre of tourist London. And to talk about it, I'm joined by my colleague and London Blue Badge tourist guide, Simon Whitehouse, and that is the area known as Covent Garden. For many years, it was the main fruit and vegetable market, but now it's very much the centre of tourist London. And Simon's going to give you a bit about the history of it, and then we have two very special guests who are going to tell us all about what it's like to live and work in Covent Garden. We are broadcasting live, so any questions you've got, then please just put them in the comments and we'll try and answer them at the end of the programme. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Simon to tell us all about Covent Garden. Simon.
Thank you very much, Nick, and a very good afternoon and a very warm welcome from London. My name is Simon Whitehouse. I'm one of those 600 plus London Blue Badge guides, and there's my blue badge to prove it. And I am lucky enough in normal circumstances to spend an awful lot of my professional life as a tourist guide and my personal life in and around Covent Garden, and I really do feel Covent Garden is my spiritual home. So it's an area that I'm very passionate about, and I'm delighted to be able to share it with you today along with two very special guests. So for those of you that perhaps haven't visited London yet, but you will be once lockdown is over, you need to know where Covent Garden is. So this is at great expense. We took a helicopter up the other day to give you an aerial view of the neighbourhood. So it's an area of central London. It's in the heart of what we call the West End. And you can see there in the image, we've put a red square around the area. So it's about a square mile or so, maybe a little bit less, about 1 million square feet. And at the heart of the area is where you see the red pin, and that is the Covent Garden market. As Nick said, it was for a long time a working market, and it's surrounded by beautiful cobblestone piazza. So it's a great pedestrian area, great for walking around without any traffic. Fantastic restaurants that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. Wonderful shopping, both sort of very well-known brand names, but also lots of lovely independent shops. And something that I'm very passionate about is the fact that it's the heart of the theatre district. And we've got in the top corner there, taking up a very large amount of space, is the Royal Opera House, one of the leading theatres in the world, and some 40 other professional West End theatres in and around the neighbourhood. So there's so much to do. You could spend quite literally all day and all night in and around Covent Garden. So let's go and have a little look at a map of Covent Garden. And this beautifully illustrated map comes from the Covent Gardener Magazine, as you can see. And we'll be introducing somebody who's connected with that in a few minutes. But you can see there that we have, again, you've got the market in the middle, and you've got about maybe just under a dozen streets and lanes that kind of surround the central market area. And the illustration shows lots of nice little sort of figures. And we've got, for example, on the left, there's sort of a man in a top hat. He's outside the oldest restaurant in London, which is Rules, which we're going to visit a little bit later. We can see a little image there, sort of on the right in the middle, of Eliza Doolittle, who some of you will know, the character from Pygmalion and My Fair Lady, the musical. There's a reference there. And you can see the Royal Opera House up there just over to the right in the sort of upper part. So you can see it's all a very compact little area and very easily accessible on foot. But let's give you a few little images of what Covent Garden looks like. So there is a contemporary image of the central market building right in the heart, as you can see, of the piazza. And that really, I think, encapsulates people, you know, just sitting outside, eating, drinking, people watching, having a good time. You know, it's got a very sort of, you know, European feel to it. If we just go to the next image, we can see this is now the other side of the market building, and you see crowds of people there who are intently watching a street performer on the left-hand side. And that's one of the really big draws of Covent Garden, is street performers and street entertainers in and around that central market area. And this is at the inside of that market building, which again, once upon a time, fruit and vegetable stalls, but today lots of lovely shops and restaurants. And in fact, we've had several art installations, and this one I had to remind myself of this one, but this is from a few years ago, and it's 10,000 white balloons representing the heart of Covent Garden. So it kind of encapsulates the beating heart of the area. So that's rather nice. So look out for lots of art installations, but it didn't always look like this. This is what it looked like way back in the 16th century. So where the green square is approximately where the modern market is today. And you can see it's all mostly open countryside. And it was once owned, the land, by the church, by the monks at Westminster Abbey. And it was known then as the Convent Garden. So there was a convent there. But in the 16th century, King Henry VIII broke from the church in Rome, created the Church of England, and the land was seized effectively. And the land was given to the ancestor of this man on the left. This is Francis Russell, and he was the 4th Earl of Bedford. And it was his ancestor that was given the land. And in the 1620s, this man on the left decided to develop this piece of land. And he worked with the man on the right of the image, Inigo Jones, who was the first classical architect in Great Britain. And together they created something really quite extraordinary. They turned this farmland really into the first planned residential development in London. And that is an image from 1660. And you can see it's been transformed. You can see on the far right of the image a block of what are townhouses. There were 3 blocks designed and built of brick and faced in stone with covered walkways. And this was absolutely revolutionary at the time. And Inigo Jones very much influenced by Italian architecture. You can see in the foreground of this image, there's a carriage being pulled by horses. That's a hackney carriage. And those were first on the streets of London in the 1620s. And they are the forerunner of our black taxi cabs that are so famous in London today. And right in the middle of the image at the back, you can see that beautiful classical style building, which is the Church of St. Paul, Covent Garden. A very integral part of the development, although the Earl was a bit reluctant to have to spend money on it, as we'll discover. But let's go to the next image. And we can see now that this is early 1700s, and it's a slightly different perspective, but we can see people, quite a lot of people in the foreground there, because by this point, there is a market on the site. So after the Great Fire of London in 1666, the area to the east of Covent Garden, the city was destroyed and people needed somewhere else to trade and to live and to work. So you can see those beautiful townhouses in the background, but now we can see more market people. And, you know, once the market arrives, people start to move out of the neighborhood and it starts to sort of become quite unfashionable by the end of the 1600s. And the market was there from 1670 right up until 1974. And these are some lovely images of the market traders, I think from probably the 1960s there, 1970s. Love the lady with her headscarf and the cabbage in her hand, and the old boys sitting on the one side of the piazza. So imagine all those buildings that we've looked at inside were all, you know, fruit and vegetable warehouses. But what happened is that the market moved in 1974 and the central building was then redeveloped to create the shopping and eating destination that we know and love today. Now we're going to come back to this church because here's St Paul's Covent Garden, and it is the only surviving building from the original development from the 1600s. And there you can see a unicyclist taking prime position in front of the church, performing in front of thousands of people. I'm going to take you just to the right there of the portico of the church into the churchyard, and there's an amazing piece of sculpture by a sculptor called Bruce Denny, and this is Saul on the road to Damascus being blinded by the light, which converted him to Christianity, and he becomes Saint Paul eventually. So that's and there you can see the windows of the church. We'll just go round now to the back of the church, and actually you have to enter the church from the back for a very good reason, and it's like a little country churchyard. And even people that know Covent Garden well, even people that work in Covent Garden, are often surprised to find the beautiful tranquil churchyard at the back. And it's at this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our first special guest, because we have none other than the Reverend Simon Grigg, who is the rector of St Paul's Covent Garden. So welcome, Simon.
Welcome indeed. It's lovely to be here. It's so nice that we've been in these difficult times at least able to meet virtually. It's not the same, of course, but it's considerably better than nothing. So it's lovely to be here and to be with you all.
Fantastic. Well, one of the things that we love to do as guides is we're very fortunate that we bring our visitors to the church, and you and your team at the church are always so welcoming to us, which is wonderful. So perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit just about your role and you know, the role of the church within the community of Covent Garden.
Well, as you said, the fourth Duke of Bedford, when he began to lay out the idea of developing Covent Garden and started working with Inigo Jones, and as you said, really invented town planning. Before that, it had all just been people muddling along. But Inigo Jones had come from a classical, as you say, he'd seen a lot of the Italian stuff. But the fourth Duke of Bedford knew he would have to have a church, because if he was going to encourage people to live there, there would have to be a church. But he didn't want to spend a lot of money. In fact, he said to Inigo Jones, in fact, I wouldn't have it much better than a barn. And so Inigo Jones said, well, then you shall have the handsomest barn in England. And that's one of its titles, is the handsomest barn in England. There it is. It's quite an old photograph. We've done a lot of redeck recently. But as you can see, in the classical style, there are no columns, there are no pointed arches. It's just a very open space. And it is first and foremost the parish church of Covent Garden. People don't realise quite a lot of people actually live within Covent Garden, as well as many more who visit, work and play here. And we are there for all of those people. But you also mentioned that Covent Garden is really the heart of Theatreland. And right back to 1662, when Charles II reopened theatres after the Puritan interregnum, he licensed 2 theatres. They became known as the patent theatres. And those patent theatres still exist, not in the same buildings, of course. One is, as you already mentioned, the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, and the other one's the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, which is undergoing redevelopment and restoration at the moment. And so right back to 1662, St Paul's has also been known as the Actors' Church, because we have a special ministry and calling to looking after the theatre profession, not least, of course, at this quite dreadful time for the profession. So we're trying to help out as much as we can, because the profession is kind of on its knees at the moment, and not in a good way. So that's our dual focus, really, to be the parish church of Covent Garden, to be the Actors' Church, and of course, as you mentioned, to be a destination for tourists to come and look. We try and be open every day, not sadly at the moment, but we do try to be open every day so people can wander in, say their prayers, or just have some quiet time in the garden. It was, of course, a churchyard until it was closed in 1852. And there it is. On the left, you can see that beautiful tree of heaven. And just in the background, that blue box, which I refer to as my TARDIS. It isn't really a TARDIS, although I like to think of it as one. And I've got a picture of me with David Tennant in it, so it may be a TARDIS after all. But it is, in fact, an 18th century lamplighter's hut. So the lamplighter would have gone around, you see, lighting the lamps in the evening, and then would have sat in there to keep himself warm of an evening. So there it is. It's all part of this extraordinary, rich kind of historical compost heap, which is Covent Garden. You mentioned the Convent Garden, and we did actually discover some bones there going right back some years ago. So it is very much at the heart of the life of Covent Garden, and I'm just enormously privileged to be able to work here and live here, of course.
Yes, well, that's wonderful. And so you conduct obviously weddings, baptisms, funerals, memorial services, of course. And because of the strong theatre links, you're often doing memorial services for actors. There are a lot of actual plaques. If we look at the interior again, perhaps another time, but.
All over the building, there are. I think there are 258. I wouldn't be absolutely sure about that because we do add to them from time to time. We added one for dear Fenella Fielding not long ago, and we will be adding one for lovely Barbara Windsor in the near future. But as you can see, just perhaps on the right, you can see some of them, and that somewhat curious granite thing in the distance on the right is a memorial containing the actual ashes of the actor Ellen Terry, very famous 19th century actress, and her ashes are there. Mostly the ashes and the bodies are not there. They're mostly just memorials, but some we do have.
Fantastic. Now you mentioned the Lamplighters Hut there in the churchyard, Simon. So that brings us rather nicely, in fact, because if we were to sort of walk out of the church and through the churchyard and through the gates and onto Bedford Street, we would find this wonderful alleyway, to my knowledge, the oldest listed street in Covent Garden. And here it is. And, as guides, one of our roles is to take people, to places they wouldn't find for themselves. And I think, it would be difficult to find this on your own. And it's first listed in the 1690s. And look at it. All those lamps that you can see are still working gas lamps. Now, although they would have been lit by the lamplighters once upon a time, they're all now on timers, but they are still cleaned and checked by the gas fitters. But isn't it absolutely wonderful? I mean, for those of you that know,
we have 8 of those gas lamps in the churchyard as well. But you're right, Goodwin's Court, it's such a wonderful little street, so evocative, and there's a gorgeous restaurant there. Again, a little hidden gem of Covent Garden there.
Oh, yes. Is it Giovanni's?
Giovanni's, yes.
Giovanni's, yes. And people might recognize it. Of course, it conjures up, a world of Charles Dickens, doesn't it, straight away when you look at that image. And for Harry Potter fans, some people believe possibly it was the inspiration for the Diagon Alley in J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World. But if you look at the image on the left there, in fact, it is used for television and movies. And that's a little shot from the sequel to Mary Poppins Returns, and they shot a little sequence down the alleyway. And
I've never seen, and we do a lot of filming both at St Paul's and, as you know, all over Covent Garden, there's constantly filming, but I've never seen as big a crew as there was for Mary Poppins Returns. It was right up the top of St Martin's Lane, right down to Trafalgar Square, and both sides. It was a huge shoot. I haven't actually seen the movie, so but it was certainly a huge shoot.
Yes, and that's the really exciting thing for visitors, isn't it? That when you walk around Covent Garden, there's an awful lot of potential for celebrity spotting, isn't there? And
oh yes,
all the time,
including of course Bob the Cat, who very sadly died last year. But the real Bob the Cat, and they made the movie, which they actually made at St Paul's.
Yes,
and then there was a sequel not so very long ago. So yes, you never know who you will bump into in Covent Garden.
Well, that's a nice segue, because that allows me then to introduce our second very special guest today, who, in fact, you and I both know. Here she is, the gorgeous Jeannine Saba, who is the founder and director of the Covent Gardener Magazine. And here is Jeannine. I don't know where this was taken. It looks like it might be in Covent Garden, but there you are holding your magazine, and look at it on the right. And it is the most wonderfully produced illustrated magazine, and I think have you got a copy there, Jeannine, too?
Of course you do. Of course.
I heart Covent Garden, quite right. So Jeannine, tell us a little bit about yourself and the fact that you live in Covent Garden and the magazine. So
Well, I've lived here for 11 years. I am a local. I am a proper Covent Gardener. Even though actually some of my other neighbours would definitely say I'm not, because I've only got 11 years. Some of them have 20, 30 years, but I'm here. I fell in love with this area. I fell in love with the community. And 5 years ago, I launched a magazine called the Covent Gardener. This magazine celebrates Covent Garden in all its wonderfulness, the culture, the history. We champion the people here. We champion the businesses. We're full into illustration is what we're very, very passionate about too. And this cover actually, for any Americans, was created by Milton Glaser, who recently passed away last year, who created I Heart New York, that logo. And it's it's the highlight of my career that this man created this cover for us. So I eat, live, breathe Covent Garden.
You do, and you can follow Jeannine on Instagram, the Covent Gardener, and she produces the most beautiful, beautiful photographs. We'll see some in a few minutes. Yes, I can't think of anybody that's more Covent Garden than you are, actually, Jeannine. So actually, together then we might just take a little bit of a journey through the Covent Garden. But just for our viewers, this is something I love about Covent Garden, is that, even though it's right in the heart of the West End, we can see this building, which is on the sort of north side of the piazza, and it's all just about, 8 years ago, I think, about 8,000 plants were put onto the both sides of the building, and it's what we call, an urban wall or sort of a green wall, and it just kind of draws people's eye, doesn't it? Up to, and I mean, Covent Garden has at least 250 or so historic buildings, from the 18th and 19th centuries. And looking up is just, a feast for the eyes, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also I like the fact that it sort of echoes the heritage of the fruit and the vegetable and the flower market. I think that's a really nice sort of link.
I have a very sweet, very short story about the fruit and veg market.
Yes.
They used to sell hedgehogs in the market, in the market building. Right next to the market building, they used to sell hedgehogs because in Victorian times, it was so full of cockroaches that the hedgehogs, they made the tourists, they made the traders feel a little bit happier that the hedgehogs would eat up the cockroaches. We dedicated our cover to this story, which I thought was too funny. Hilarious.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully not too many cockroaches today, but we will get lots of insects in that living wall, lots of bees and wildlife. Let's take a little journey down that street. We're going to see an image of another street, which you can see the wall on the left now, but we're looking down Floral Street. And on Floral Street in the 1990s, they made the most amazing discovery, which led us to learning much more about the early origins of Covent Garden. They excavated this stunning brooch, which we're going to show you on the screen now. And it's in the Museum of London, but it dates to the 7th century AD from the Anglo-Saxon period. And it's just evidence that there was this community here at that time. And Londonvic, as you can see there, was the name of the community. Londonvic, literally meaning the port of London. And I don't know if it's still there, Jeannine, but on the Aldwych, just on the southern boundary of Covent Garden, there was a coffee shop called Londonvic.
Oh, it is still there.
It's still there, is it?
Yeah.
I think it is, yes. So isn't that wonderful, that we've got this coffee shop, this modern coffee shop in Covent Garden, named after the original Anglo-Saxon settlement. So we don't know who this belonged to, but possibly an Anglo-Saxon warrior princess or something like that. If you've seen The Dig recently, the movie on Netflix, all about the Sutton Hoo ship burial discovery, which is fantastic, although that's in a different part of the country, it's the same time period as this beautiful Anglo-Saxon brooch. Now, if we move on a little bit further, this is the opposite end of Floral Street, and we're looking up at that incredible piece of architecture which connects two buildings. The building on the right, or the building halfway down on the right, is the home of the Royal Ballet School, and the building on the left, taking up the whole block, is the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. And that bridge, it is a bridge, and it's an actual working bridge, is called the Bridge of Aspiration. And I'll explain a bit more about it. We go to the next image. We can see the entrance to the Royal Ballet School on the left-hand side of Flora Street, and on the right-hand side is a member of the Royal Ballet Company. Her name's Francesca Hayward, and she was a graduate of the school some years ago now, but she's a principal ballerina, one of the 90-some ballet dancers that form the Royal Ballet. And that is a view now of the Royal Opera House from Bow Street. And you can see it's wonderful, a beautiful 19th century theatre on the right, a restored 19th century market hall, or actually flower market hall in the middle, and a huge modern extension that was added on in the late 1990s. And it occupies a huge area, about 2.5 acres. And would you agree, Jeannine, the Royal Opera House is sort of, it's almost like a mini city within
Yes.
the city.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think you're an opera and ballet fan, aren't you?
Of course.
Jeannine, yes, of course. And of course, not only is it a wonderful place to go to see world-class opera and ballet, but actually you can see at the bottom there, there's a lovely cafe which has just been restored, redone in the last year or so. And in normal times, it's open to the public in the daytime. So you can go in, have a coffee, go up to the roof terrace. The roof terrace, yes, which is
Fantastic.
one of the best places, isn't it?
I agree.
Anywhere in London. One of the best views in London.
Of Covent Garden. Yes, of London, definitely.
Yeah, great. So we'll carry on with our journey. And we're just moving actually to a slightly different neighbourhood here. This is within an area called Seven Dials. And I think just highlights again these lovely independent shops that we have. And this is called Neil's Yard. I think you're a fan of Neil's Yard, I'm sure, Jeannine, aren't you?
Absolutely.
And you can see Neil's Yard on the right. Neil's Yard Remedies, probably, world famous now as an organic, organic toiletries. But these were all warehouses that were converted into these very colourfully painted shops.
Banana warehouses.
They were that's right. They were banana warehouses again. Yes. So linking into the into the history of the market.
The Donmar warehouse was banana.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That was the banana warehouse. Yes, of course.
I love
it. And then of course we've got lots of places to eat in and around Covent Garden. So let's have it now. Actually, this restaurant is on the street where you live.
It is.
Which of course is another lovely link, isn't it? On the street where you live, to My Fair Lady, of course. Which we might come back to in a minute. But this is the oldest restaurant in London, and it's on Maiden Lane.
Yorkshire puddings and fish pies.
Oh, yes. In fact, this is where we met, isn't it, Jeannine?
Yes, Simon,
we met. We
with
met
my mother.
With your mother. And for those of you that don't know Rules, you can see the interior. It's this beautiful sort of Georgian, kind of Georgian Victorian mix, really. But traditional British food, as you say, fish pie and, great. If you like game and you've never really had game before, pheasant and partridge and woodcock. It's the epitome of just great British dining, isn't it? And if you've perhaps, again, movie and TV fans might recognise it. Downton Abbey, they filmed a couple of scenes in Rules. The Bond movie Spectre with Daniel Craig was also filmed inside Rules. And there are more connections to the theatre, actually, on Maiden Lane, aren't there? I think we'll bring Simon back to join us, shall we? So he can say hello.
Hi again. Yes.
Hello.
Well, one loves the previous owner of Rules used to come to church, so I used to eat there a lot. And the roast beef is absolutely wonderful. But the almost opposite Rules, of course, is the headquarters of Nymax Theater. Nymax Theatre, which is run by Nika Burns, and she owns 7 of the West End theatres. So again, and two of the West End theatres back onto Maiden Lane. And Maiden Lane, of course, comes originally from Midden, so it was a sewer, it was a midden, so it's a very, very narrow street. And so when you're doing a get-in, particularly at the Adelphi Theatre, because it has very big musicals, it's a real struggle because the lorries block up the street, and it's a real nightmare. But there's some truly wonderful little restaurants and shops in that, in the whole of Covent Garden, really.
Yes, and that's the great thing, isn't it? I mean, every street name in Covent Garden, there's a story behind the street name, isn't it? I mean, Maiden's one good example. Yes, I'm trying to think of another. Can you think of any others, Jeannine, where there's a great story behind a street name? We've got.
Well, of course, King Street was named after Charles II, and the other side, the two streets that are either side of St Paul's Church. So there's King Street, fairly obvious one, and Henrietta was named after his queen. So King Street and Henrietta Street were the two names. And of course, a different monarch, the Theatre Royal Drury Lane had two sides because George III and his son couldn't stand each other. So the theatre was, one half was the king's side and the other half was the prince's side. And the two coats of arms are still there and are being restored at the moment.
Here it is. This is the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. So this is where the West End Theatre began back in the early 1660s, although this is the fourth theatre on the site. The Theatre Royal
habit of burning down, of course, because they were all naked flames in those days. So the theatres used to burn down with monotonous regularity, but this one has lasted since 1812, I think.
1812,
right.
Yes.
And of course, Andrew Lloyd Webber is currently restoring it, and I've actually had a tour around it. It's going to be absolutely amazing. And what he's done is restore it very much more to what it looked like in 1812, rather than its most recent restoration, which was 1947, after a bomb struck it in the war. So it's going to look quite different, but it's going to look amazing when it opens. Though quite when that will be, we do not know.
That's right. We'll take a look at some other theatres just to give us a flavour of some of the other theatres there. We've got the St Martin's Theatre, which is opposite the Ivy restaurant, where Jeannine and I, again, we spend quite a bit of time at the Ivy, don't we? The Ivy is probably the most well-known restaurant in the area, and it's rather a bit like Sardi's in New York in a way. It's where, people go after the show, actors, directors, and even well-known people to the Ivy.
Ooh.
And Simon seems to have disappeared for the moment, so we'll carry on. Hopefully he'll return in just a moment. He seems to have frozen at the moment. Tell us what it's like being in Covent Garden at the moment, though, with no tourists. I mean, every time I've been to Covent Garden, it's been packed. It must be really weird.
It's very weird and very depressing, isn't it, Jeannine? Because there's just literally nobody about, and I've never seen the place so empty, and it is very sad. And to see theatres empty, to see restaurants boarded up, it's terribly depressing. But we've got to be hopeful. We've got to say it will improve, it will get better, and to say to your listeners, when we can, please come back. We really need you. The businesses need you. The restaurants need you. The theatres need you desperately. And think of all that money you've saved if you are in work by not going to the restaurants for a year. So please come back and spend lots and lots of money in the West End, because we really, really do need it. And the actors, and what's been particularly tragic for theatre people is, of course, actors are quite often out of work, and quite often when they are out of work, they work in restaurants. So even their backup jobs have gone. So it's been pretty grim, hasn't it, Jeannine?
It really has. It's hard. It's hard,
Isn't it? Hard for everyone. Simon, I think, has returned, so I'm going to hand back to him now. So, Simon, we were just talking about what Covent Garden has been like during the pandemic with no visitors. It's weird.
Yes, and in fact, I think actually, Jeannine, you've because you photograph every day. I think just about. We've got some images a bit further down here, haven't we, of Covent Garden at the moment.
but I try and be hopeful because nobody wants to keep seeing. I try and be always positive on the Instagram account, always.
Absolutely. Well, and so. Before we sort of have any questions, I mean, there's some images right now, but yes, it's very unusual to see it like this, isn't it? Because, I mean, I think the last figures we have is something like 40 million people a year visit Covent Garden. So it's got to be one of the most popular destinations just about, anywhere in the world, really. So if you had, and there's very recent photographs of yours, Jeannine, proving that we do get snow in London occasionally. So you can see Covent Garden's snowbound. So it's wonderful any time of year because in the winter you can cozy up in one of the cafes, and in the summer, of course, you can sit outside. So where's your, Jeannine, where's your top spot to visit? You've got a favorite cafe you might like to suggest, or favorite place to go?
I like Espresso Room on New Road.
Espresso Room. Oh, that sounds rather good. Yes.
It's adorable. It's tiny. All the locals meet there around 10 o'clock. They used to 10 o'clock for coffee. And how lovely is that? There would always be about 10 of us with the dogs. We'd have a coffee and then start our day and do our work. I miss that a lot. So that is beautiful. Really beautiful. That's one of my favorite places for coffee.
Espresso Room. That's the. And what about you, Simon? Any?
Well, Yeah, I particularly like the independents. There's obviously a lot of chains, but there's a family restaurant called Pasta Brown, and it's in Bedford Street. It's almost opposite my front door. They're very nice in there. They're very friendly, and it's an independent, and it's lovely. And look who's come to say hi. This is my cat.
Oh,
Phoebe,
how gorgeous!
Hi.
Hello.
This is Phoebe. So yes, Pasta Brown would probably be my favourite. My favourite restaurant in Covent Garden.
Well, it's all appropriate, isn't it? You know, for a square that was influenced by, you know, Italian design. We've got, you know, a pasta restaurant, an espresso place to have coffee, all very Italian, isn't it? And actually, we've also got, of course, wonderful shopping. I just wanted to just bring this up if we can, Nick. There's an image here of a wonderful shop which is in the central market. And there's so many shops we could talk about. This is called Benjamin Pollock's Toy Shop. And you can see the inside of it. You can buy beautiful Victorian theatres, model theatres that children can build. And if you've got family, you know, it's a great place to bring children and adults too. And it's just really nostalgic and wonderful. And there are lots of shops like this. Any favourite shops? One favourite shop, Jeannine?
Benjamin Pollock's. I went to China with Louise. She was asked to turn the Christmas lights on 2 years ago, and I went with her.
Fantastic.
Louise is one of my best Covent Garden friends.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Always Benjamin Pollock. Always, always, always. It's the best place for toys. Any type of gift. It's perfect.
Another favourite of mine is Penhaligon's, I have to say, which is the perfumers, which is, oh, you just walk in there and, oh, just divine.
I do love Pollock's Toy Museum, which is a little bit out of our area, but is suffering an awful lot, having a tough time at the moment. So you can Google that if you can help out there. But yes, I must admit, I love Pollock's. We actually have in church a much bigger model theatre that was built in the 1920s. And it's a completely working theatre. It has a working fly tower. It actually has lights on everything. And when we're open, do come and have a look at it. It's a really extraordinary piece of work that was built in the 1920s. And I found it in bits when I came to St. Paul's and had it restored. And it's a fabulous model theatre. And we keep it in the foyer for everyone to have a look at.
Fantastic. Well, although at the moment, as we know, we're in this sort of, very strange situation, but we very much hope that just, God willing, as soon as we will welcome our visitors back to London, back to Covent Garden. You've given us lots of fantastic ideas for places to visit. You've given us a lovely insight into what it's like to live and work in the neighbourhood. And I think, do we have any questions, Nick, from any of our guests today?
We do have a few. It's a fantastic trip around Covent Garden. Thank you all very much. It's a wonderful place. I know a lot of the time when we're between jobs, we're going to sit in Covent Garden because it's such a lovely place to relax. And it's maybe quite nostalgic looking at all those images. There's a few comments here. We've had people, someone watching us in the United States. So one from France there as well. We've also someone in Italy. Mena is actually in the Wirral. Bodil is in Norway, so we've got people from around the world. Praise for Simon there from our leader, the chair of the APTG, who says what Simon doesn't know about Covent Garden isn't worth knowing.
And Simon will always tease me when I take people to the church, because he always says to me, "Don't pay any attention to what he tells you." He always tells me. He always says to my visitors,
"He knows
nothing." He knows nothing.
He knows nothing. Here's someone in Germany. You've got people in Switzerland. We've got someone in Finland. We've got someone in Portugal. So yeah, people all around.
I think we've reached everywhere today. Goodness.
I think we have. And Lynn says her husband used to work in the old Covent Garden market. And she used to sell Alexander Rose Day flags at Covent Garden when she was 17. You get there at 4 a.m. in the morning, and the market was in full flow. So it must have been an amazing place when it was a market, an active market.
It was unusual. There was a pub that had an early license, so that when they sort of finished their trading, they could all go into the pub at sort of like 6 a.m. because they'd finished their day's work. That doesn't apply anymore. But
no, I think
of course we've got lovely historic pubs, haven't we? I mean, so many historic pubs in Covent Garden, the Lamb and the Flag, and
the pubs at Smithfield have the same hours. I think they're open very early in the morning for the people selling the meat overnight.
Yes. So before we, do we have any other questions from?
We do. Yes. So there's a question here that I think would be a good one to end in, and it's: can we have recommendations about other places to go, bars, restaurant, coffee shops, and what would you say is your most interesting fact about Covent Garden? So you've probably all got an idea of that.
Oh gosh.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say the most interesting fact from my point of view is in the 18th century, it became known as the Square of Venus, and all those lovely townhouses became coffee shops and brothels, which was the inspiration for the TV series Harlots, which some people may well have seen on Netflix. So it was the centre of the oldest profession in the world in the 18th century.
And there was actually one of the houses. It's now been demolished, but there was a house up against the wall of St. Paul's Church, which was a brothel. So that was we were not exactly involved in the trade, but associated with it, shall we say? I
bet the churchyard saw a few interesting.
It still does, but probably not suitable for family viewing. But yeah, we do have the occasional incident along those lines. And just another recommendation, I think, would be Giovanni's, which is another gorgeous restaurant in Covent Garden. What about you, Jeannine? Where else do you like?
I have a fact. I have a favorite fact. So do any of you know which founding father lived 16 years in Covent Garden? Rumor has it that he really, really believed in the healing properties of fresh air and would stand naked on his balcony every morning for 16 years.
Is that Benjamin Franklin?
Yes, it is.
Oh my God!
There's a Benjamin Franklin Museum. It's in Craven Street. It's a little bit out of Covent Garden, but I used to live next door to the Benjamin Franklin house. And I lived there for 10 years. So yes, that's why I know that, and it is alleged to be true. What have we got? Can I just correct an urban myth about Covent Garden, though? There was a book about Covent Garden written by someone called Clemence Dane, and she claimed that a highwayman is buried under the high altar of St. Paul's Church, and every year people come and say, "Is this true?" And it's not. It's an urban myth. It's an urban myth. So you heard it here, and it's not true.
You sound as if you've been checking. Have you been doing some digging in the night?
Well, we do some digs from time to time, but it's a complicated business, as you can imagine, in a Grade 1 listed building. Yeah,
absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you all very much for that wonderful trip around Covent Garden. It's definitely a place everyone should go on a visit to London, and hopefully we'll see people back in the city before long, enjoying the delights of the wonders of Covent Garden. So Jeannine, Simon, and also Simon for presenting today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Join us.
Thank you both
again
for joining us.
Come back and see us soon.
Check out the websites as well. Check out Jeannine's Instagram. Check out our website. It's guidelondon.org.uk. And check out our YouTube channel as well if you want to catch up with any of our previous broadcasts. But from now, for all of us, it's goodbye.
Bye-bye. God bless. Bye-bye.